The next question is about education. As a high school teacher, I see this as really important. What should the federal role in education be, and what can we do to prepare our students and improve our schools so our students are prepared for the workplace? David?
Well, there's nothing more important than education. As a father of four, looking into my kids' eyes and seeing concerned about the direction of their education, it's something that we have to be looking at and questioning and asking ourselves all the time, are we doing the right things? My father was a school teacher for 33 years. My sister's a school teacher. And I can also tell you that, unfortunately, school teachers most of the time don't make enough money. They can't focus on their trade and on their skill. My father ended up having to work 2 side jobs, cleaning country club kitchens, and I used to go with him every morning and help him, help provide for our family. So teachers' pay is something that we have to raise. But we also have to expect more from our teachers. Our teachers need to be very, very accountable for the job they do. And it has to be a team thing between parents and teachers. There are schools out there that are really, really working, public schools that are working. I've seen them, my kids attend them, and we need to use those kinds of models. David Pollock talked about some there in Moore Park that are really working. And those models need to be applied to the schools that are not working.
Supervisor Bennett?
It's a great frustration for me. It's a great frustration for most people in the United States. And when you think back, for a long time, the United States education system was the envy of the world. And I think there's no question that that strong education system we had played a major role in why the United States became the dominant power that it became in the world. I don't think that there's anybody that thinks that we have the education system that is the most modeled or looked up to education system any longer. The federal government does have some role to play in terms of trying to make this happen. Part of why we had a successful education system in the past is that free public education swept across America in the 1800s, while national systems in the rest of the world had trouble going to free public education. They were more hamstrung. But now we have a situation where we have to ask ourselves, what are the key critical components to reform? And people spend a lot of time, a lot of non-experts. I appreciate the fact that we have people sitting here that have pretty good background in education. People spend a lot of time talking about it, politicians, many of them without very much background, and they focus on what is politically going to sell well. In reality, if you ask everybody to really stop and think about what makes good education, what were your best educational experiences, it was when you had a great teacher. Just that simple. You had a great teacher that turned you on. Didn't matter what the federal standards were for testing or anything else. And there are countries out there that really focus on getting their best and their brightest to be teachers. And I think that we have to get back to getting great teachers in the classroom, and that by itself will solve many of our problems. We do need federal standards out there if we're going to be competitive internationally, but we've gone overboard with testing, and we've hamstrung the ability of teachers, of the great teachers, to really focus on what makes great teaching out there. So that means more resources. That means we have to make an investment in it. And some people would say we can't afford the investment in education. And I would offer to you, this goes back to my solution to stimulating the economy. And that is, if we don't train, if we don't invest in people, if we don't train the workforce, if we don't have a middle class that has growing expectations and growing income, we'll have a lot of trouble balancing our budget. We need a middle class that has growing incomes, growing prospects. They'll increase their taxes. We'll have a much better revenue stream coming into the United States, and we get a 2-for-1. We get people that are in much better shape, better education system, and a balanced budget.
David?
Well, first of all, I think that public education is the very foundation of our democracy. I mean, we invented them in this country specifically because we knew that if we're going to entrust government to the people, that the people have to have a basic education so that they can be responsible with that responsibility. And I'm horrified that in the state of California that we have laid off 30,000 teachers in the midst of the deepest economic recession that we've seen since the Great Depression. It did not help. It didn't help the economy, and it's not helping our children, who are now also having their school year cut back because we can't afford to provide them a good education at the same time that we're saddling them with this huge debt. So education was the reason I got into public service. To start with, I was concerned about my children's schools. I took a hard look with a committed group of 28 other people at what really makes a better elementary school. And we were able to implement real reform that empowered teachers, that changed the culture of the schools, that changed the culture of the community about education. And we got amazing results. And quite honestly, in the beginning of my service with public education, we didn't think too much about the federal role in education. They provided about 7% of education funding, and it was mostly directed specifically to kids in poverty, the National School Lunch Program, and things like that. But then the Bush administration implemented No Child Left Behind, which in retrospect was essentially a leveraged buyout of the public school system and trying to make the case for privatizing public education. And I think it has done more damage to public education in the I think it's 12 years that it's been in effect, than any good that it has created. And we need to go back and rethink the federal government's role in public education. The federal government needs to be focused on setting standards and providing a common measure for schools across the country. But we really need to leave real school reform and real accountability at the local level where it belongs. In fact, I'm convinced that's the only way that you will ever actually reform schools.
The next question is about the 2010 midterm elections. Republicans ran on a jobs agenda. What happened?
Well, a couple of things. One, we should be aware that under the Obama administration, jobs are growing. They're just not growing fast enough. Jobs in the private sector have grown. Meanwhile, public sector jobs have decreased. But what I think happened was that the Republicans made a strategic decision that they were more interested in making sure that President Obama had no successes to run on for re-election than they were in actually stimulating the economy and getting things going. And it reminds me of the analogy, you want to drown the captain of the ship, so you sink the whole ship. And they have wanted to, their reluctance, for example, for the payroll tax extension, clearly needed to stimulate the economy at this point in time. But their reluctance to do that is a reluctance to, again, give him any success as this election is coming up. The other thing is that they want to take us back to the policies that got us into this in the first place. And those policies are policies that actually make income inequality get worse in the United States. And I think that squarely is an issue that they need to take some responsibility, significant responsibility for. But income inequality has grown dramatically, and every time in the history of this country when we've seen income inequality grow and we see the middle class get squeezed and we see people at the top getting wealthier and people in the middle and the bottom getting a smaller and smaller percentage of the pie, we have significant problems that follow that. Certainly in the 1920s that happened. We had the Great Depression that followed that. It happened in Europe also, and you had those problems in Europe. So the Republican policies that sound like they're focused on the middle class, but in fact are contributing to this growing income inequality, will keep us from ever getting the job creation that we need. We need investment in infrastructure. We need investment in education. We need smart investments to move this economy forward. And you've seen the Republicans constantly resisting those common sense things. The other thing that I would offer to you, said, what's the Republican role there? The debt crisis that they manufactured last July is just an example. Instead of spending all of that time and energy trying to figure out how we could get Americans back to work, we had an artificial manufactured crisis, and the net result of it was they increased the debt ceiling, and we have a lower bond rating, and we just added a little bit more doubt to those foreigners that right now we're dependent upon to buy American bonds. That's an example of putting politics ahead of job creation in the United States.
David, what happened?
Well, it's one thing to say that you need to create jobs to get elected. It's an entirely another thing to actually do it, and that's where I fault the Republicans for using that to get themselves elected and then pursue an entirely different agenda once they got into office. My background is in business development, specifically high technology business development, and I see great latent potential in Ventura County. We have this technology corridor that runs along the 101 freeway all the way from the border of Ventura County and all the way into the Oxnard Plain. And I see that this technology corridor could become, for green technologies, what Silicon Valley did for computers. We have incredible talent here. I worked at a company in the Valley that is the premier rocket maker in the country. And what people don't realize is that rocket engines are energy conversion. The Space Shuttle main engine, for example, creates tremendous power, and the exhaust is nothing but water vapor. We have that kind of technology. It was developed right here by people that live in Ventura County. In the far other end, we have examples like Gill's Onions in Oxnard, which has taken onion waste and compressed it into juice, put it through a converter that puts it into a fuel cell and generates all the electricity that they need to run their factory. Another great example of the innovation that's happening right here in Ventura County, and I think that's something that the federal government needs to start investing in, and I think we have incredible opportunities right here in Ventura County, and as our congressman, I will push to make sure that we invest in that kind of technology.